Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's special presentation by the Lancaster City Human Relations Commission. Here is your Madam Board Chairperson, Mrs. Jasmine Craybill.
Good evening and welcome all to Lancaster City's Human Relations Commission second town hall meeting. What to do when witnessing discrimination. Have you ever witnessed discrimination at the workplace or in a public place and wondered what you could do to help? Are you even sure what you witnessed could be considered discrimination under the law? What can you do to work for equality in our community? Well, tonight we are honored to join forces with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, YWCA Lancaster Center for Racial and Gender Equity, and life and leadership coach, Dr. Kristen Albert, to answer some of those questions. We couldn't be more excited to facilitate this very timely conversation on one of our country's most historical days. The mission of Lancaster City's Human Relations Commission is to positively promote the cause of equal human rights in the city of Lancaster by working to eliminate discrimination through citizen action, education, and enforcement. Thank you for joining the commission and encouraging yourself and others to think about and be empowered to work on issues of justice in the new year. After our three partners have finished their presentations, we will have a brief Q&A session. Their contact information will be shared throughout the town hall. And with no further ado, allow me to introduce our first presenter, Stephanie Chapman from the Pennsylvania HRC. Ms. Chapman is an assistant chief counsel with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. She has been with the commission for 21 years and has worked in a variety of areas, including employment, housing, commercial property, and public accommodations. She has conducted numerous trainings on a variety of issues, including practice before the PHRC, landlord-tenant law, service support animals, and fair housing law for groups including PBI, Office of General Counsel, Mid-Penn Legal Services, local fair housing groups, and advisory councils. She received her JD from Widener University School of Law, Harrisburg campus, and her BA from the University of Pittsburgh. Let's welcome Stephanie Chapman. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here. I will start out by explaining who we are, what we do. So I work for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and we do have a two-part mission, which is to both enforce the Pennsylvania non-discrimination law, which is the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, as well as the Fair Educational Opportunities Act. And we promote equal opportunity for all in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So the question that was posed to me when I was asked to do some training is, what do you do if you see discrimination? So here's my tips. Let me tell you this. In employment, let's start there. If you believe that your employer is discriminating not only against you, but a certain class of individuals that are protected under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, then I think the first thing that you need to do is to know that you need to report it. You need to report it to management, to your supervisor, to the HR department. Whether or not that discrimination is directed to you or another individual, your duty is to report that discriminatory conduct, what you believe is discriminatory conduct. I would suggest, again, I am an attorney, that you put it in writing. Not that you can't just tell them that you believe there's discrimination, but that you do put it in writing. And I would encourage that you tell the party that you believe is impacted by the discrimination to also file, to complain to management, the HR department, the union, depending on where you work, who the individual is that you report it to. But I think it's important. And I think it's important for you to know that not only are the individuals that are directly impacted by the discriminatory conduct protected under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, but anyone that would report discrimination is also protected under the Human Relations Act. So you don't have to be the individual that is impacted. We protect individuals that we call it retaliation, so that a bad act happened to you because you reported discriminatory conduct or allegations of discriminatory conduct. You don't think there are enough women, people of color in management positions, and you report that to whomever your chain of command would be, or whoever you reported it to, you are protected under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act for bad conduct or bad acts that happen to you because of reporting that. So I want to make it clear that those individuals are also protected under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. If you would be called upon as a witness in a case of discrimination under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, you were protected. So those would be my tips in employment. There are a lot of protections for individuals that do believe discriminatory conduct is happening in the workplace. Public accommodations is a little tougher for me. I'm sure that the experts we have speaking after me can do a better job because you're going to listen to me and you're going to go, oh, I have no satisfaction after listening to her. But here are my common sense tips. If you see discrimination in a public accommodation, again, depending on the situation, depending on how volatile the situation is, perhaps you feel comfortable telling the individual that you feel is making discriminatory conduct or comments or conduct by saying, hey, that's not all right, that's not okay. I would suggest that you get the individual targeted away from any kind of aggressor. This is the part that makes me nervous when we talk about a public accommodation and individuals that are heck bent on discriminating in a public place. Is safety is most important at that point. So my suggestion is to get the individual away from that aggressor, depending on the situation. Of course, never engage in physical contact. I don't think I have to repeat it, but I will because I hate for someone to say, I heard Stephanie Chapman at this training. Please never try to engage in any physical contact when there is an aggressive situation in a public accommodation. I would immediately report it to any kind of manager at the location, an owner, even if it just looks like a shift manager at the place. I would absolutely report it immediately, and I wouldn't wait for your pen and paper. Please just report it verbally. And I would absolutely encourage that the individual that was impacted by any type of discriminatory conduct in that public accommodation to come file with the PHRC. We have numerous ways to file complaints with us. On our website, PHRC at pa.gov, we have questionnaires that can be filled out online and immediately submitted to the Human Relations Commission. You can call and you will be scheduled an appointment with an intake investigator who will take your complaint over the phone. And with today's technology, we can email those complaints, get them signed immediately, and that is considered filing a complaint with us. Of course, you can do it the old-fashioned Stephanie Chapman kind of way, print it out, write it out, mail it back to us. We aren't working in the offices right now, so I would tell you that a phone call or email are absolutely the best methods to get a hold of us. But I would encourage individuals to file with us, again, both in employment or public accommodation. We do cover housing and commercial property as well. Here's my plug. If you are discriminated against in housing or commercial property, again, my suggestion is to immediately file a complaint with us. We are there, even though we're not in the offices. I just want you to know, we're diligently working, taking these intake complaints. And so those would be my suggestions. As far as if you see discriminatory conduct in your everyday life or what you do. I'm really close to my 15 minutes. I'm willing to take any questions or any more explanation. But again, my suggestion coming from the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, doesn't matter the city or the county in which you reside, would be to file a complaint.
I have one question, and that
Absolutely.
is just what you cover, like what groups you cover, because I do know that Lancaster City covers LGBT people. Could you address that a little bit?
Sure. Well, with our wonderful Supreme Court decision that says sex discrimination does include LGBT issues, we have, not just from the Supreme Court decision, we do take those complaints. And we took them under gender conformity, that they weren't conforming to your norms of gender. But we absolutely do take LGBT complaints. It is not a stated protected class, but like I said, with the Supreme Court decision, so we take what you would typically think of: race, sex, religion, disability, national origin, support animals, blind and deaf, service animals, the handling or training of service animals we take. And again, we do take LGBTQ complaints, and we have for a while, but our Supreme Court decision really does help us.
Stephanie, would you be able to share some discrimination that is unlawful, like a specific discrimination?
Well, I did talk about retaliation, so that if you report discrimination, if you assist in somebody complaining about discrimination, we cover that. But employment, now, so we cover a bunch of areas, but in employment, it's hire, fire, fail to promote, suspension, discipline, a wide range of employment situations that we would cover, that you think that bad act happened to you because of a discriminatory reason, because of a protected class, discharge. We have housing discrimination, which is, again, evict, different terms and conditions, failure to rent in the first place, a reasonable accommodation, both in employment and housing, which would be that you have some type of disability and you need something special that you are denied because of your disability. Familial status is also a protected class in housing, which is having children under the age of 18. Age, geez, at my age, I can't believe I forgot age discrimination in any of the areas. More than that. Public accommodation is considered education for us as well. So K through 12th grade is any type of discriminatory conduct in schools against children would be a public accommodation discrimination case for us. The Fair Educational Opportunities Act is higher education, so which would be in colleges or grad school. Pretty broad.
Yeah.
Pretty broad. Yeah.
And do you
But just keep in mind we're here. So
and Stephanie, do you all Title IX, is that something that falls into things you've all had to work with or do, or is that more in the?
It's more in the federal realm. We are considered substantially equivalent in employment with EEOC and the Fair Housing Act in housing, so that cases that are typically filed with EEOC or HUD that are jurisdictional in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we would investigate the complaint, and our federal partners would review those complaints so that you are filed both federally and state, so that your state and federal rights are preserved when you file with one or the other of us. So in both of those, in EEOC and HUD, we are substantially equivalent. Title IX is federal. We don't have a state agency that handles that.
Well, thank you, Miss Stephanie Chapman.
You are welcome. Thank you. And any questions, I will be here throughout the training, and I'm anxious to hear the rest of you.
All right. Well, next to the virtual stage, allow me to introduce the YWCA Lancaster's Jasmine King and Venus Ricks, who work out of the Center for Racial and Gender Equity. Jasmine King is the director of the Center for Racial and Gender Equity. She grew up in Lancaster and attended Millersville University. With a background in communications and public relations, she has devoted her work to fighting for social justice. She states that the center motto is listen, learn, and lead. And we will establish a trusted center that will challenge the structural, racial, and gender barriers to equity. And her co-pilot, Ms. Venus Ricks, is an equity training and strategy specialist with the Center for Race and Gender Equity. She has spent over 15 years working with groups and organizations in creating more diverse, inclusive, and equitable spaces. Her experience crosses both the education and community sector. As an equity training and strategy specialist, she uses a socialization to liberation model in working to dismantle systems of oppression and create equitable spaces for marginalized groups to thrive in their home, communities, and work environments. Thank you, ladies.
Great. Thank you, Jasmine. And I love our new titles, pilot and co-pilot, on a day like today. Happy Inauguration Day. I will claim it.
Yes.
So thank you for that. Like you said, my name is Jasmine King, and I am the director for the Center of Racial and Gender Equity. I'm also joined by my colleague, Venus Ricks, who is an equity training and strategy specialist. Something I want to pull out and just mention that we all have heard today is a poem by Amanda Gorman. I want to just pull out that last sentence that says, "For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only brave enough to be it." As we walk through this journey of talking tonight, and then once we log off and go about our lives, just remember that we are on a journey and that we are a light in our respective communities. I'm going to talk about some common language so that we can make sure that when we are working to dismantle these systems, that we're using the right language and terminologies. So the first one is racism. Racism is an institutional or structural power premised upon racial stereotypes, prejudice, or when one's use of institutional structure, power creates, maintains, or reinforces policies and practices that further racial inequity. So in order for racism to exist, there is institutional, structural power, racial bias, prejudice, and stereotypes. Very important to remember. Another term that I'm going to bring up is equality and equity. And I know Jasmine mentioned equity when we first logged on to this meeting. Just want to make sure that we know that equality is when everybody is treated the same. So with equality, the emphasis ignores the historical and structural efforts that benefit some social groups and communities and may harm other social groups or communities, while equity works to treat everybody fairly. With equity, you work to render justice to deep understanding of the structural barriers and factors that might not have been rendered to everybody. So when we think about a giving tree, and I'm going to use my colleague Venus and I for this giving tree example. If we have a tree and apples are up upon the tree, and we're both reaching for those apples as the image of the giving tree gives. With equality, both Venus and I will get a ladder to reach up to those apples. Venus is taller than me. I'm only 5'2". So Venus is taller, so we both get that same ladder, but she's able to get the apples more than likely, and I still can't get the apples. So that is an issue that they've tried to work on an equitable standpoint, but we're still not able to get what we need. When we're talking about equity, I'm taller, I'm shorter, she's taller. I'm getting that taller ladder so that I can get up to the apples, and then she has a ladder as well. But we still know that that tree, which would be the system, still needs to be straightened out so that it is fair. That is how the best way to remember these terms of equality, equity, and working towards a standpoint of meeting folks where they're at. When we talk about prejudice versus discrimination, although they are close and alike, prejudice is a prejudgment. It can be based on myths, stereotypes, missing information, misconceptions, preconceptions. It is a feeling or attitude. It is a thought. Discrimination, as Stephanie mentioned before, is an action. So when you're differentiating the two, prejudice is thinking, discrimination is the actual action based on the prejudice. So prejudice is a prejudgment of people, things, whereas discrimination is a reflection of the action. So prejudice in the mind, discrimination is an action. I'm going to pass it off to Venus. I think that it's important, and our center always stresses the importance of having that common language and knowing terms so that we are speaking with folks, we're all on the same page. So I appreciate you listening to me for that.
Thank you, Pilot. It's time for co-pilot now. So we'll see what I have for you. And so in thinking about what Jasmine was talking about and how we have relationships and how equity works out, right? And in some of those situations, and a lot of those situations, our communities are so divided. There was a time in which we were by law separated, right? So racial groups or class status, whatever it was, you were separated from other people. And now we have voluntarily decided we are going to stay in our enclaves, right? We're not going to necessarily connect across difference. And what that is doing is causing folks to have those thoughts in their minds, right? Those prejudices, but then they have the action with it because they're not connecting with people that have lived experiences that are unlike their own, right? And so, Mark, if you want to show our first slide, my first kind of doodad there. Am I supposed to see it? Oh, there it is. Okay. So, right, so when we're doing these conversations around difference, oftentimes we are trying to find fault in someone's points, right? We are less likely to be looking across to someone else to say, you know what? I appreciate what you are bringing to the table. I appreciate what you bring to our community. I don't know much about you, your race, your ethnicity, your sexuality, your religion, but I feel that you are of value to my world. So I'm going to be appreciative of that and then inquire about you and learn about you versus you being a science experiment, right? Oftentimes we look at people like, how can I figure you out from what I already know versus engaging with them with what they're giving you, right? And so when we think about these conversations we have across difference, a lot of times we want to debate and we want to discuss. And when you're debating, it's about winning or losing, right? And when you're talking about people's social identities and how they walk the world, there's no winning and losing. I can't tell you or a white woman how to live. A white woman can't tell me how to live, but I can learn from that walk of life and they can learn from my walk of life, right? But if I'm in a debate and trying to find flaws or trying to find something that is wrong in your story, then how am I actually opening my ears, my mind, my eyes, my spirit, my soul, whatever it is, to your lived experience? And so what we try to do, what we're working on at the YWCA is how do you create spaces for dialogue? So you're sharing and you're giving narratives and you're talking about who you are versus discussing, right? Discussing is whoever's the loudest is heard, right? In a debate, whoever is giving the strongest argument is the winner. But in dialogue, there are no winners, there are no losers. We are sharing, we are saying, I don't know how you live every day. I can read in a book, I can watch on television, but what do we know about how we're socialized from the media, right, around these identities? A lot of these identities are social constructs that have left us with real implications to negotiate and navigate in the world. And so then what happens? We create these, from these socializations and these kind of silent messages that we're getting over the years that we don't interrupt, we now interact with people based off of those falsehoods. So I might interact with a short person like my pilot in one way because of what I've learned about short people. Now, I don't want to make discrimination, right? But short people do get discriminated against. Let me not take them off the table, right? But when we're talking about that institution, what we do is we play into making sure that the structure stays in place. And so we're so focused on how individuals are faring that we don't look at what the power players and what the power structure is doing in order to keep us fighting and doing this to one another. So if you spend more time in dialogue, you may spend less time in discrimination. I just made that up. How about that? And so, Mark, if you'd like to go to the next one, I can also tell you a little bit about triggers. And so in having these dialogues, it is important to know what your comfort zones are, your learning edges are, and your triggers, right? And so we think as we're going along, we don't realize that, again, socialized around certain identities or certain belief systems, right? So for instance, we've been taught that men are natural born leaders. We know that's not true. We do. Men are fine leaders, but we know they're not natural born leaders, right? And that against women being natural born leaders, right? So I know when I hear that, that's a trigger for me. But if I respond to that trigger in a way that's not constructive, that opens up for conversation, then how am I shutting the door? How am I closing off for me to work through that trigger, for me to find a more productive way to talk through that trigger or to behave through that trigger? And so understanding your emotional responses to social, what I want to say, Jasmine, help me. What's the word I want to use? Maybe you don't know either. I've lost the word, but anyway, knowing how you respond. So if you scroll down to the next page, and I am going through this fast, I apologize. Where's the emotion part? Are there emotional ones? They're further down. There we go. So these are different examples of how we sometimes respond when we're triggered. And typically when we're triggered, whether we are the person, because, you know, intersectionality, you can be a privileged identity and you can be a not privileged identity. So 1 minute as a Black woman, I'm marginalized, and the next minute as a person that might be in middle class, right? My class status makes me in a place that I have privilege over someone else. And so you have to know when you're being checked about that or someone's addressing you on that, what is your trigger going to be and how are you going to respond? And also when you have to address someone who has triggered you, how are you going to respond, right? All of this is important on the individual level when we're working one-on-one together, because as we work better together and dialogue better together, we will continue to dismantle the larger system. And so I will be quiet. And the last thing I will say is, I am because we are. And that is what you must go through in life. In order for us to move past where we are as a community, as a society, you have to think, I am because we are. We all didn't create this, but we all are here to make sure that it doesn't continue. The end. Thank you.
I actually didn't want that to end. I'm still trying to catch up. Like, I'm gonna have to go back in those slides. That was some great information.
I think I have a couple minutes, but I was trying to get.
You do, if you'd like to continue.
Is there anything you have questions about or something you want me to go into more?
Not specifically. What's tugging at your heart to tell the world today?
We need to put space in between our thoughts and our mouths.
Oh.
Our thoughts, our mouths, and our actions. We are socialized so much so to divide and to find out how you are not like me so that I can keep you over there. This is all for capitalism, right? We know that racism and economics are this close together, right? As long as we keep promoting whiteness and white supremacy, capitalism wins, right? And money, people love money. The only thing that's green that keeps us together is green, right? The only color. But we have to do more with what we know about people and putting that space between a thought, an action, and a word. I don't think we do that enough as a society. And I think we've learned over the last couple of years, it's okay to just say whatever, even if it's not true, even if it's false, even if it has no, right? And that's not the case. So I will say to you, as much as you can, slow down. Think about what you say, think about how you act. And the things that you've learned about someone else are typically wrong. So figure it out on your own. Appreciative inquiry, that's my new favorite thing. How do you appreciate those who live around you and find out about them, not, again, as if they're science, but as if there's something to offer you and your community.
Would you be able to repeat that last quote? I am because...
We are.
I am because we are. Someone just asked that on my watch party, so I thought I'd share that. Anyone else have anything for the pilots?
I just want to say thank you for the information that you gave. It was great. And I really appreciated how you talked about the intersectionality, and especially how, you might be in a marginalized class, but you might still, because of some of the categories you fall into, have, a certain level of privilege. And I don't think that a lot of us really kind of recognize that. So I really appreciate you giving voice to that.
Okay, well, we will move to our last but not least presenter for the evening. We have Dr. Kristen Albert with us, AKA Chris. She's a lifelong resident of Lancaster County, and she is honored to be a part of this evening's town hall meeting. About 3 years ago, Chris began a personal journey to unpack and understand her personal relationship with white privilege and implicit bias, and set herself on a path to help other white Americans of European descent to do the same, and further to declare themselves to be anti-racist, not only in self-identification, but in determined and focused action. Since then, she has developed an online implicit bias training entitled Intro to Power, Privilege, and Leadership for White People who are beginning their own journeys. Chris is an active member of the Lancaster Be the Bridge group, Lancaster Stands Up, and the NAACP. She has developed and facilitates racial justice small groups for the Lutheran Church of the Good Shepherd in Lancaster. And she is currently engaged in a 10-month racial healing and wellness coaching program to continue to focus her growth, learning, and actions on eradicating racial injustice and creating equity and safety in all spaces within her sphere of influence. Hit it, Dr. Chris.
Thanks, Jasmine.
Thank
Well, you. I'll tell you what, I'm going to set a timer here because I'm better off if I got this little timer going off. So, I'm in the midst, I'm on this panel with all these wise and all-knowing folks, and I'm going to be hitting it from, an everyday journey kind of perspective, because that's where I live with my journey and where I've been with my journey, but also what I've been trying to take on myself and helping other white folks like myself unpack our understanding of our own white privilege and our implicit bias, so that, as Maya Angelou said, when we know better, we do better. And so that's my deepest hope. So the question about our definition of discrimination, I love how Jasmine, she really broke it up into some real specific distinctions between different kinds of discrimination. And I'm just going to say, for me, as I talk through this, that I'm looking at discrimination as anytime you're using difference to deny the human rights of another human being. Okay, so based upon judgment, right? And we've been judging things since the day that we were born. When you look at an infant, and that infant judges whether it's hungry or it's not. When it's hungry, it acts in a certain way. When it's not, that child is content. That child knows the difference between hot and cold, or warm and snuggly and cold, and then cries, right? So we learn to distinguish based on everything that we observe. Even the child that has the game where they're dropping the French fry off the off the tabletop to see mom or dad pick it up, right? We learn by those experiences, and those experiences are what predispose us to the behaviors the way we see things and the behaviors that we engage in. So, we're products of our experiences in that way. But using that difference to deny the human rights of others, that's where it's problematic, right? When we use difference, whether it's economic status, whether it's education, family, social affiliation, color, ethnicity, any kind of difference that you can think of. And then using any of those differences to impact someone's basic human rights, their safety, right? Their education, their right to clean water and shelter, and not just shelter, but great communities, right? So it ties into the whole system. So that's how I'm looking at discrimination as in terms of what I'll share with you. So, this discrimination, so many people are living it now, and they live it every day, and they continue to live it. And that is just the sad truth of this. And that's why I wanted to accept this invitation to speak, because this is my personal kind of, this is what I'm all about. So, so the question, what do you do when you witness discrimination? So I'm going to use my coaching language here for a second, because I'm a leadership and a life coach. And so, as I said a little while ago, your beliefs impact your actions, right? And then that impacts the results that you get, right? So if you believe, for example, that we all have the ability and responsibility to show love, empathy, respect, and give honor and protection to our fellow human beings, if that is your belief, that's a great starting point, right? But that doesn't necessarily move you to action. And so the next piece of this is the belief needs to inform what I'm going to call a declaration. And a declaration is a statement that you make or that you hold that predisposes you, that sets the direction for how you will behave. Okay. So if my declaration is, I declare my vision, I will not stand by and watch someone be treated with less than respect. I will not stand by and watch someone be ignored when they are in trouble. I will not stand by and let someone with a need stand without standing, or at least offering my support. I think this goes back to an experience when I was a kid in high school, where I experienced bullying, right? And lots of kids experience bullying, but I was put up against the locker, and dog dirt put on my in my front, my pavement, and the lines of my mailbox was smashed. I mean, a bunch of really nasty stuff, right? And I experienced in that a deep understanding for how it feels to be on that side of discrimination in that way, right? And kind of said to myself, I will not stand by and let these kinds of things happen to others. And then, as you said in my bio, in these last 3 years, I've been really starting to unpack that and look at how that impacts, with my implicit bias and my white privilege, and go into that more deeply. So going back to this beliefs inform behavior. So first I have to say, my belief is I bear responsibility, right? I bear responsibility. I just can't watch and not do. And then my declaration, I will not stand by and watch people be treated indiscriminately, right? And then the third part of it is your body, right? Your body has to be congruent with those beliefs and declarations. And so you have to stand rooted, right? You have to take a deep breath and stand rooted and be stable in that belief. And I taught middle school for 17 years, right? So, if anybody's going to, my declaration was, if anybody's going to be miserable in this classroom, it's not going to be me, right? So I learned how to step into my stability, right? So the belief, the declaration, the stability, and then you are ready to take action. You've brought those pieces together. So here's where it gets complicated though, okay? And I'm talking to the other white people that are listening on the call, okay? Because it does get complicated, because just because you can doesn't mean you should, okay? So you have to consider, is this helpful? Is it wanted? Is it my place, right? Asking permission, not assuming, right? Because we can get into the, we can quickly step into being, as white people, being paternalistic or disrespectful, because we can assume that just because we can, we should, right? And that's not always the case. So it can be sticky. So I don't know if you know the author of this book, My Grandmother's Hands, Resmaa Menakem, just really awesome stuff. But he offers a number of, I'll call them interrupters, for lack of a better thing, that tips that as white people wanting to step in and work against discrimination. So let me give some to you. So when you see, first of all, he talks about that when you see a person in distress, in need of assistance, don't assume it's not your problem, right? Offer your help if you can. Ask yourself, what would I do if this person were white? Okay, so I'm talking to my white friends out there that are hearing this, because this is the, you know, I can only speak from that wisdom, right? So Menakem says, so when there's no line in a store and a black and a white salesperson are both equally available, choose the black salesperson. If you have a retail job or service job and a black customer comes and a white customer walk in at the same time, assist the black customer first. These are just ways that you can live into this and challenge these learned behaviors that you've learned over time, right? When you're waiting to be served, he says at a bakery or a butcher shop, and he says a black person arrives at the same time as you, let them be served first. If the person behind the counter offers to help you first, shake your head and say, I believe it's his turn, right? So, and by the way, Menakem specifically says he uses the word, the nomenclature of a black customer, because the white person, that's usually the instantaneous way a white person sees the other person in that moment, okay? They may be biracial or indigenous, you know, any he's just using it in that way. If you can choose between two equally good dentists or gardeners or guitar teachers or math tutors or personal trainers and so on, one white and the other black, select the black one. So I thought these were just really interesting ways of just adjusting how as a white person you might think about how you approach and see differences. So I want to leave with this quote, with this in mind. Confronting white skin privilege and sharing that privilege often involves small, everyday, courageous acts. As you'll discover, these courageous actions will also benefit you. As you practice them over and over, they will help your body experience more settledness in the presence of Black and other non-white bodies. Okay, but that as you'll discover, these courageous actions, everyday courageous actions. So the last question is, how can we do better in 2021? Okay, that was what was one of the questions posed to us. So, so again, I'm talking to the white people in the audience. So I'm going to say, examine your own white privilege and your implicit bias. And Jasmine mentioned my intro to power, privilege, and leadership. And that's designed to help people to unpack that. Examine your beliefs and your declarations as they pertain to standing against racism. Learn from Black, Indigenous, people of color. Learn from, but learn with those, from those that you have a relationship and who have consented to answer your questions. Don't expect people of color to be your private concierge and to answer all your questions. Because I'll tell you what, my Black friends are very, very tired, very, very tired. So don't expect them to be the ones answering all your questions. But if but you can ask, right? It needs to be a consensual relationship. And don't be offended if they simply say they don't have the capacity or the energy to do that. And my last, how we can do better in 2021, never stop learning and trying to do better. And you're going to make mistakes and you're going to continue to make mistakes, but that doesn't mean you don't try to do better. And that's what I've got for you in 2021. And I've got 1 minute and 32 seconds left. Any questions, thoughts, wonderments?
First, thank you for sharing. I really appreciated your perspective. My question is, has your journey within the past 3 or 4 years been more challenging and or like facilitating the journey for others? Has it been more challenging, given the actions and things we've seen over the past 4 years? Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. It's always, I think for me, it's always challenging because I have to remember that I don't know what I don't know. So anytime I'm facilitating those conversations, they are to help people do that discovery from the inside out, right? But I have seen people more motivated, white people more motivated to step into the conversation. Has not made it more difficult, but I also have friends of color that have offered to support this effort of mine so that I have that network of support that I can reach out to. Does that answer your question, Chris? Sorry, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question, Chris. So you talked about your Black friends being tired, or your BIPOC folks in your life being tired, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been hearing a lot from folks about how do you make relationships across difference, right? And kind of with what I've heard from white folks, how do I make friends with Black people? And I'm like, you don't really want to be I just want to make a Black friend. It doesn't really work that way. So maybe this is not too personal. Can you maybe talk about how you made those relationships and how you got to that authentic place where they are willing to work with you in the work and don't feel like they're laboring for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I look at it as part of my responsibility as white German European American, that there are reparations, right? And so what I have sought to do out of my desire to offer what I can is to create spaces and make offers to be able to offer my gifts in spaces. So I have a Woman-Owned Business Wednesdays group, right? And one of the things that the Woman-Owned Business Wednesdays Facebook group does is intentionally, well, we've got, what we stand for, right? Amplifying voices, creating a world and a space where voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color are amplified and no longer systemically silenced. Inclusivity, providing an inclusive environment, learning in action, learning from the wrongs of the past and committing to do better. So creating that space and creating a safe space. And now I'm developing relationships with the women in this group that are authentic relationships. And so it came out of not my intention to rub elbows and get to know and get in with it. I look at it for me, I look at it as, what can I offer? And how can I be of service? How can I use my privilege to lift other people up and serve in that way? Is that bad? Is that good? It's just, it gets, I'm still making mistakes. I'm still figuring out. So if I'm saying bad things, call me on it.
Can I jump in, Dr. Albert, too? Just with another book. I know you brought up a book and I put it in there.
Yes.
So I'm going to hold up this book, Me and White Supremacy, about
Very good.
combating racism, but also being a good ancestor. It's an awesome read, especially as we lean into Black History Month. I'm sorry, it's my son in the background. As we lean into Black History Month, it's a 28-day plan. So pick up the book and then just follow that. Apologize. Follow that moving forward. And I think it's aligned with what you were saying, mentioning earlier, as well as Venus when she was talking about social conditioning.
Yes, thank you. It's a great book.
One thing that I thought about is, as far as our community has plenty of places where a white person can go and be in the minority if they choose to, but not many of us choose to do that. There's churches you can go to. We're segregated enough that there's sections of it, county or city, that you can go to, and you won't be the majority. And that can cause some discomfort, but it does, it's like, it's how you learn and how you can kind of be open to some different experiences as well. And the other thing, when you were talking about, if two people come in at the same time, maybe serve the Black person first. And I think for a lot of white people, their first reaction to that is, oh my gosh, well, that's reverse discrimination. Now you're just, I'm supposed to just be colorblind and not see that there's a difference there. And the thing I think people need to understand is that you always see that difference in your mind. We're programmed to be that way, and to do something consciously about it is just starting to address it.
Thank you.
And that conscious doing something about it is, so I don't want to get all sciencey on your psychology on you, but literally this stuff has changed the plasticity of our brains, right? So our brains formed to how we've learned this stuff. Yes. And so by consciously working against it, we are retraining ourselves not to discriminate. And that's what we have to do. It's so ingrained in our society in the US, it's all over with colonization. But when we're talking about our country in particular, it's so ingrained in our fabric that we are carrying it in our bodies. And so if we don't do the work to reverse that, we're going to continue to think, right? There are people that are walking around thinking that my subordination, right? The way that I've been socialized to be subordinate is actually where I'm supposed to be in life. And don't even have the idea that, oh, I'm not supposed to be walking around like I'm less than you. And there are white folks who have way less than some people, BIPOC people, and are walking around here like they are the best thing since sliced bread, right? So there's a way in which we have learned these things that are not real at all. If Oprah can be discriminated against at getting her Birkin bag or whatever it is, or at Hermes, then listen, right? So we have to think about how this stuff has actually, we think that it's very real and it's in our psyche, it's in our physicality, our all of that now. And we have to do the work to reverse that so our brains are not doing that anymore. White people in particular when it comes to race, because y'all really have been taught that y'all are the bee's knees.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Thank you.
I just wanted to add that we don't have any questions so far, but I did want to share that we have a lot of accolades and support on the Facebook page. So your message, everyone, thank you, is really hitting people.
I see something in the chat, in our Zoom chat here, from Leah. Leah says, thank you for telling white people about themselves, including me, from Facebook. So that'd be Miss Leah Mardrum.
Ah, yes.
Well, and right now we're talking about racial groups, but really any group that has a difference. I mean, the male, female, the straight and LGBT, all of those are things that I think a lot of your same techniques could be used for.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to take Venus's question and, how did I come about hanging out with my LGBTQ friends? How did that happen? I just was kind of taking that question and wondering about it. Yeah.
I appreciate that you're even thinking about that. And Mark, I love that you pointed out, go somewhere where you're the minority, because really that's our life. When I go to work, I'm the only Black person. When I go to Starbucks, I'm the only Black person. I was just talking about this to a friend. And I said to him, you will never wake up and live in that world, but that's our world every day. And it's expected for us to just live with that. And it's just not fair. So I appreciate that you even pointed out, go make yourself the minority somewhere. That's how you learn.
Back on October 18th, I don't know how many of you went to the Black Expo, that Black Business Expo in Clipper Magazine Stadium. I went because I was getting ready with a colleague to start the Women-Owned Business Wednesdays, and we had decided that we wanted to make sure that we elevated all voices. So I went and I wanted to support the Black-owned businesses. So I bought some stuff. But this one little girl, she had her own business, and I bought this cute little bag that I will never use, but it's in my car now as an emergency kit. So I do use it. But I just had wonderful conversations but it was like Jamie said, just putting myself into that space. That was a new experience for me. But I will say that I noticed a difference with how I felt going this October than I would have 3 Octobers ago, before I had kind of started unpacking this and understanding myself in that. But yeah, it's important to do. And then, yeah, it's important.
Don't forget, there are protected classes that you grow into. There are some that you're born into, right? So race, sex, but there are some that you grow into. The protected class of age is 40 and above, and you may not feel discriminated against at 40. Well, that's what the statute gives us, 40 is 40 and above. So once you're 40 and above, but I mean, rest assured, when you're 60 and think that your employer is trying to get rid of you because you make too much money and he thinks you're too old, it's a class that you grow into. And I would hasten to tell you that discrimination or disability is another one of those. Thank goodness, we're healthy with medical, science the way it is. You're living a lot longer with much more disabilities than our forefathers. So, disability is a protected class that maybe one day you may be in, so that you get the understanding of individuals that are unable to walk down the street without their walker, their service animal, their cane. So there are protected classes. We like to be secure in what we know and what we have and who I am, but it unfortunately can change at a drop of a hat. And, it's really something to think about. So I didn't mean to disagree on those protected classes, like I said, that we're born into. And so you want to, broaden your horizons and understand others. But unfortunately, there are protected classes that you're going to be in that you didn't anticipate.
I just want to add, in the interest of time,
Oh, you went mute, Jamie.
Thank you. I just want to add in the interest of time because we got a question kind of late here from Nick Myers on the Facebook page. He wants to know, is it okay to go into a Black church or a similar place? He says, part of me feels like being able to do that comes from a place of privilege. It may not be seen as welcoming if they're considered safe spaces for a person to be Black. So that's one interesting perspective. And I think maybe Nick may have missed where we were talking about, make yourself the minority, get that uncomfortability with the situation. But, I think it's important to do that, just like Mark said and Dr. Albert said.
And a church, actually, a Black church may be maybe a good
Right.
first place to start, but a good place to start because of the energy. And like a church is different than, I dropped in on this BIPOC space that's just for BIPOC people to be with BIPOC.
Right. Yep.
That's different than, oh, there's a Black church. You know what? I worship, same worship, but just different church, right? I'm going to go and connect with some other people that worship the same way that I do, who might look differently.
That was my first foray. I attended a service at a Black church a couple summers ago, I guess. And I felt very welcomed, and it was a very warm space, and I was able to worship with everyone. It was different than the worship that I was used to because I'm, like I said, I'm mainline Lutheran, right? It's very liturgical, and I guess that's my
Yeah, they actually move, right?
Yeah.
I have one comment that maybe everyone can speak to here. A very close friend of mine, she's on my watch party, and I think it's something that I'd like to discuss because I think it almost sometimes is a barrier. She says, when she said, use my privilege, perhaps use the word platform, I feel like just saying the word privilege automatically draws an imaginary line in the sand, just because it's such a sensitive word that white people will never truly understand. So what do you guys think about that? Because that's what I've heard is that, people kind of turn off, they don't listen anymore past the word white privilege.
Because they're white fragility. I mean, I'm not being funny. I mean, that's really what it is.
Right.
So basically where we are is now we have to find ways to make white folks more comfortable with being told how they are. And that's not going to help us in the system and help Black people stop dying, help brown people stop dying, help immigrants stop being put in cages and not being with their families, right? And so there's this way in which we protect whiteness. That whiteness does nothing to protect us. And so we have to stop coddling white folks. They do nothing to coddle us, absolutely nothing. And I don't say this as anger or bitter, it's just a truth. Right? When BIPOC folks are struggling, where are white people at? But we are always wondering, how do we get them to listen? How do we get them? If we know Black folks, just to do that group, right? We are not as indigent as we once were. Now I'm saying there is a disproportionate number of poor people, right? Black and brown people, but there are more degreed Black folks. There are more Black folks that have access to money. There are a lot more of us that have money that white people don't think that we do. And what is happening is we think we don't have access in the ways that we, right? Or what we put those resources into, or we keep them kind of in one way, right? And so what's happening is white folks see us in the same way that they see us all the time. So in protecting them from seeing things is not helping us move forward. By deciding how to change the wording so white people feel more comfortable is just doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And we are in 2021 and we see it has done nothing. White folks are protected left, right, and center for doing egregious stuff for centuries. And we are still trying to figure out how to not do words so that they're upset and pushed out. If they don't want to help, then move. There's plenty of people, white folks, that are on the bus to get to the next place. I'm not so much, it's like that 80-20. Where's the 80%? Who are the 80% of white folks that are ready to go forward? I'm not concentrating on those 20% of people that need me to rub their back in order for them to know that my life is valuable and that I should be seen. I'm not working with those folks anymore. I'm working with the white folks that can hear, that can see, and I happen to get paid for a job to help those white folks that can't hear and see. But I get paid to do that.
Well, and speaking for some of those white folks, I think what I've seen is there are a lot of people that, they feel they're a good person, they're caring, they feel like they care about the issue, but they don't, whenever anything is actually questions maybe something they did or how they are acting, they get defensive because you feel like, well, I am a good person, I didn't mean that in a certain way, rather than looking at themselves and what they have done or what their belief system really is around the whole issue. They get defensive and just don't want to go there.
It's one of the things I've noticed in the Intro to Power, Privilege, and Leadership, that when people get to that point where that very first or second module and they're going, wow, this is hard. This is hard. And I've actually had to do a little bit of, I guess, I hate to say it, this coddling to create this safe space so that they are willing to open their eyes and see things differently. So that hopefully then they're now, so that as they work through the modules, they are recognizing, holy crap, I didn't know this, but I had to create a safe space for them to be able to reflect and engage it. But I agree, we can't, you nailed it. We can't change the language out in the open just because it hurts some white person's feelings. It's just, we as white people have a responsibility. That's we do.
Yeah, the other thing there that I've seen is people that, you feel like, oh, I worked hard for everything I got. And so every privilege I have earned. And that's just not true. I mean, there are people that work plenty harder than you that don't have half or even half as much as you do.
Correct.
And it's that understanding of no one's trying to take that work away from you. All we want you to understand is that to get to that work, it may have been a little bit easier than, say, someone whose skin looked like mine. No one's saying that you didn't work hard. There's just an element that it may have been a little bit easier because getting to college happened before for you, right? The things that happened for you to get to a certain level of success in life were allowed or permitted before they were for other groups. So that's the part, right? It's not that anyone's trying to take your hard work from you. I'm sure you did work hard. Also, you got access to things well before, even as a poor white person, you got access before a Black person that may have at some point had more money than you, potentially.
Well, and the other thing with that is systems that Black people did not have access to for generations. Once some of that opened up, it was like a half second until someone said, well, you can't put them ahead of, and then I think there are a lot of white people that there's anything to address any of those systems, they feel like, they're being discriminated against. When if you look at the numbers, the facts that are out there, it's obvious that they're not being discriminated against.
And there's a whole, I don't know if any of you have ever seen it, it's called the Racism and Immigration Timeline. And it's literally laws from like 17 something to 2000 something that shows not just for Black people, but Asians and Native American, like Indigenous people, all of the laws in this country that have been put into place just to basically otherize people, particularly around race and ethnicity, is astounding.
Yeah, the last one we did, the last town hall like this was about housing discrimination, where I got examples of in the deeds of, in the Lancaster area of how non-Caucasians were barred from owning a house in places like School Lane Hills or Grandview Heights. And unless you were a servant, if you were a servant, you could live there. But otherwise, and that's actually in the deed. And people are so unaware of that.
I actually asked, I was wondering about that in this whole kind of human relations conversation, and knowing that people have on their deeds, like you have people of color who've bought houses here, and on their deed it says for whites only, right? So what, like, how do you get that stuff off of these legal documents? Like, that just seems like something that should be an easy fix, that I shouldn't have to live in a house and my deed says for whites only.
Well,
It's not
it
an
is,
easy
it is
fix.
unenforceable.
Yeah.
So we know that these covenants that,
Wow.
you know, are on deeds, are in homeowners associations, they're unenforceable. That you couldn't sell your home to anyone of color or anyone that wasn't Caucasian, they're not enforceable. You can, and again, I work for the Human Relations Commission. I'm not a realtor attorney, but you can quickly get them off because they're unenforceable. The United States of America does not recognize any of those covenants any longer. There's your attorney viewpoint.
Well, and just, they're not only unenforceable, it's illegal to do that anymore. They're still on the old deed, because unless you like pay money to a lawyer to take it off, it's going to be on the deed, because it's not easy to change deed restrictions like that. But and it's one thing I learned in the course of all that was, for a long time they were allowed, and then the Supreme Court made a ruling, I think in the 30s or 40s, that the governments couldn't do that, but private people could still do that. Okay, and then a couple decades later, the ruling was, oh no, none of them are enforceable, but they didn't make it illegal, so that they could still be there and people could still do, you know, discriminate, or at least make the non-white person feel like you're not allowed in this community, even though it wasn't illegal for them to do that. Because, and then finally it was the Fair Housing Act in the 60s that made it actually illegal to do that, but not till then.
I just want to put out too, because something that wasn't mentioned yet was about our mental health that surrounds all of this conversation that we're talking about. And when you're mentioning about the housing, I think about even saying that it's an easy fix, that trauma that ensues for those people that it was directed towards, that's passed down generationally, by hearing that language, by seeing that document, even us having this conversation right now, just to keep mental health at the forefront as a measure that needs to be put out there when we're dealing with discrimination and these different things that are operating, these different systems that we need to dismantle. So I don't know for the next conversation where that will lead, but there's a lot of healing that needs to be surrounded with this, this topic that we're talking about.
Right, because think about how many plantation houses we're living in. I live in one. Like, I live in a plantation house. Like, it was a plantation house and I live in it. Like, that's right. And that's all over this part of this, all over. So it's just kind of wild that we are living in like shrines to slavery in this country still.
Yeah,
This has been some great conversation, but I don't want to hold everyone up. And I see we're getting a lot of great feedback from the conversation. So I want to thank everyone who participated today. And I feel like we as a collective, we could continue this conversation probably till midnight. But we will be posting on our Facebook page the contact information for all of our participants tonight. And we also welcome any feedback on our Facebook page. And we do hope that this presentation has led others to reach out to our presenters, because obviously you have a tremendous amount of information to bring to the forefront here. Like Jasmine says, when we start healing and moving into this new transition here, I also welcome the opportunity right now for the community to use our Facebook page to provide us with ideas of what other town hall meetings you would like for us to conduct moving forward. We will be doing these town hall meetings on a quarterly basis, so we will have 3 more throughout the year. We have some ideas, but we definitely welcome the feedback of our community members. So I want to thank everyone involved tonight, and I got a lot of great nuggets, and I hope to continue like the friendships here that we made here on this call in our safe space. So unless anyone else has anything else to add for the good of the presentation.
I was going to say, does the YWCA know what's happening with the Race Against Racism at all this year yet?
Yes, we do. So our Race Against Racism information should be coming out in February on our website. So I appreciate that you put that in the chat box. It will be virtual this year. We were not able to get permits with everything that's going on with COVID, so it will be virtual. But we're really working to align our mission to eliminate racism and empower women more concise this year. And when I say that, really we have some ideas for some podcasts that we're trying to hash out and some partnership relationships. But the route I don't want to give it all away. I'm going to say, go to our website. It's going to be intentional with the mission. We will be really stressing the historical context of Lancaster County. So you will not only be walking the walk, running what you're running, but we hope that you'll listen, learn, and lead, as Jasmine said earlier in my bio, and understand the ground that we walk on here in Lancaster County. So yeah, website in February.
I love that teaser.
Yeah, I was gonna give it away, but I feel like a cliffhanger.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
This is book club tomorrow, if anyone's interested.
Yes, and I guess we'll drop all of our YWCA things. Tomorrow we do have book club. Venus is going to be co-facilitating with Lancaster Library on how to be an anti-racist. We still have some copies of the book at YWCA, so if you're able to mask up and go there and pick up a book, that would be great. You do not have to have read the book in order to be in that conversation. We also will have our Community Now discussion, which leads into this conversation a little bit more. That is on the 28th of January, and talking about workplace equity in the public and private sector. So please check out our website. A lot of great things happening in addition to what we presented. We do that on a regular basis with our Racial Equity Institute and customized trainings.
Fantastic, fantastic. So to everyone, until next time, be the change you wish to see in the world and get it done.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.